True story, A Animal Instinct family. Nobody understood why the cat guarded the crib all night. A story about instinct, love, and the silent heroes we overlook every day. It was 3:17 in the morning when Sarah finally admitted something was wrong. Not with the baby, with the cat. For the fourth night in a row, Oliver, her 8-year-old orange tabby, had refused to leave the nursery. He wasn't sleeping there. He wasn't playing. He was sitting perfectly still at the edge of the crib, ears forward, eyes locked on the baby inside, letting out a low, steady hum that was somewhere between a purr and a growl. Sarah had tried to move him. He came back. She had closed the door. He scratched until she opened it. And now, standing in the doorway at 3 a.m. in the pale blue glow of the baby monitor, she watched her cat and felt the first cold needle of real fear run down her spine. What happened over the next 6 hours would change everything she thought she knew about animals, instinct, and the invisible bonds between creatures who share a home, and it would be shared millions of times online. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was undeniably heartbreakingly real. This is the story of Oliver the cat, a sleeping baby named Mia, and the night that proved science and love are not as far apart as we think. A cat nobody wanted. Oliver had been a rescue. Sarah's husband, Daniel, had brought him home in 2016 from a local shelter where the cat had already spent 14 months. An eternity in shelter time, long enough that most animals stop expecting anything good. He was not a kitten, not particularly cute in the Instagram sense, and he came a file that listed his traits in polite shelter language: independent, particular, and not recommended for homes with small children. In plain terms, difficult, picky, complicated. But Daniel had looked at Oliver through the chain-link door, and Oliver had looked back without flinching, and something passed between them that defies rational explanation. Daniel paid the adoption fee and carried Oliver home in a cardboard carrier held together with packing tape. For 2 years, Oliver was exactly what the file said. He chose when he wanted affection and ended it without warning. He knocked things off shelves with the cool deliberateness of someone making a philosophical point. He slept at the foot of their bed and hissed at strangers. He was, in Daniel's words, aggressively himself. They loved him completely. When Sarah became pregnant, the advice came from everywhere. Get rid of the cat. He'll smother the baby. Cats and newborns are a disaster. They heard it from neighbors, read it in parenting forums, and even received a gentle suggestion from a well-meaning aunt who sent an article about toxoplasmosis. They did their research, took precautions, and decided Oliver was staying. He was family. What they could not have predicted was what Oliver would decide about the baby. The night everything changed. Mia arrived in October, small, red-faced, and furiously alive. The first time they brought her home, Oliver approached the carrier with the slow, deliberate caution of a scientist. He sniffed. He sat back. He looked at Sarah with an expression she would later describe as profoundly unimpressed. Then he walked to the nursery, jumped onto the armchair in the corner, and curled up. He had decided something. No one knew what. The first 3 weeks were unremarkable. Oliver kept his distance from Mia but was consistently present in the nursery, always in the armchair, always awake when Sarah came for late-night feedings, always watching. Sarah assumed it was curiosity, possibly jealousy, probably just the cat being strange. She didn't think much of it. Then, on a Tuesday night in early November, everything shifted. Oliver did not sleep in the armchair. He positioned himself directly at the bars of the crib, sitting upright on the changing table pushed against it, his whole body oriented toward Mia with an intensity that stopped Sarah cold when she came in at midnight. She tried to move him. He made a sound, not a hiss, not quite a meow, something low and continuous that she had never heard from him before. She left him there, unnerved but exhausted, and went back to bed. He was there at 2 a.m., still there at 4, still there when the sun came up. He wasn't behaving like a curious cat. He was behaving like a sentry. Something in him had switched on, and he was not going to switch it off. The second night, the same. The third. By the fourth night, Sarah was scared enough to call her pediatrician at an embarrassing hour and describe what the cat was doing. There was a pause on the line. Then, has anything seemed off with Mia? Temperature? Breathing? Feeding? Sarah looked at her daughter sleeping in the crib and felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. She picked up the baby monitor and looked at the data she had been too tired to read. Mia's resting respiratory rate over the past 3 nights had been climbing. Slowly, not dramatically, not in a way that would have triggered the monitor's alarm, but steadily, quietly, in a direction that no one had noticed, except apparently Oliver. They were at the emergency pediatric clinic by 5 a.m. Stories like this deserve to be heard. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that love shows up in the most unexpected forms, sometimes with fur and 4 paws. Share this story, what the doctors found. Mia had a respiratory syncytial virus infection, RSV, in its early stages. In most healthy adults, RSV is a mild cold. In infants under 3 months, it can escalate with terrifying speed into bronchiolitis, a swelling of the small airways that can make breathing dangerous. Caught early, as Mia's was, it is very treatable. Left unnoticed for another day or 2, the doctors told Sarah carefully, it could have become something much more serious. How did you know to come in? The attending physician asked. Sarah hesitated. My cat, she said. There was another pause. Your cat. He wouldn't leave the crib for 4 nights. He just sat there and watched her breathe. The doctor said nothing for a moment. Then, quietly, cats have a sense of smell roughly 14 times more sensitive than ours. RSV changes the chemistry of exhaled breath. It's not impossible. He paused again. I've heard stories like this before. Not many, but I've heard them. Mia was treated, monitored, and home within 48 hours. She recovered completely. Oliver, for his part, returned to the armchair the night they brought her back and stayed there, watching for the rest of the month. When Mia was fully healthy, he gradually returned to his old routines, sleeping at the foot of the bed, knocking things off shelves, being aggressively himself. But something between him and Mia had been established, something wordless and permanent. The science behind the Sentinel. Oliver's behavior, extraordinary as it seemed, is not without scientific grounding. Cats possess an olfactory system of remarkable complexity. Somewhere between 45 and 80 million scent receptors compared to the approximately 5 million in a human nose. This sensitivity does not just allow them to track prey or identify other animals. It allows them to detect chemical changes in their environment, including the chemical signatures of illness. Research into animal detection of disease has grown significantly in the past 2 decades. Dogs trained to detect cancer have demonstrated accuracy rates that rival clinical diagnostic tools. Rats have been used in tuberculosis detection programs across parts of sub-Saharan Africa with striking results. And while cats have received less formal study, anecdotal evidence, and a growing body of veterinary observation suggests their capabilities in this area may be substantial. There is also Oscar, perhaps the most documented case of feline medical sensitivity on record, a therapy cat in a Providence, Rhode Island, nursing home who, beginning around 2005, would curl up beside patients who were within hours of death. His accuracy was tracked by the facility's physicians and eventually published in the New England Journal of Medicine. Oscar is not a myth. His file is real. He has been present at more than 100 deaths. What drives this behavior in cats is still not fully understood. Some researchers believe it is scent. The dying, the sick, and the very young all produce distinct biochemical signals that a cat's nose can parse. Others suggest it may relate to warmth, to sound, to vibration, or to behavioral cues so subtle they fall below the threshold of human perception. The honest answer is, we don't completely know, but the evidence that it happens is difficult to dismiss. In the case of Oliver and Mia, one thing is clear. The cat noticed a change before any human instrument did, and he responded to it with a kind of focused, sustained vigilance that most of us would recognize in any species as protection. What we miss when we stop listening. Sarah posted about Oliver and Mia 6 weeks after that night in November. She was not trying to go viral. She was not angling for attention. She wrote a quiet, careful post with 2 photos. One of Oliver at the crib bars, taken on her phone at 3 a.m., because she hadn't known what else to do, and one of Mia sleeping safely at home after her recovery, and she wrote exactly what had happened. No exaggeration, no embellishment, just the timeline. It was shared 800,000 times in 4 days. The comments were a mirror of something deep and almost universal. People wrote about their own animals, dogs who had paced and whined before a family member was diagnosed with diabetes, cats who had sat on specific body parts later identified as tumor sites, birds who had screamed at windows hours before earthquakes. Veterinarians and biologists wrote respectful, carefully worded acknowledgments that the science, while incomplete, pointed in the same direction as the stories. A few people wrote dismissively, as they always do, about coincidence and confirmation bias. But most people wrote something simpler. They wrote about their cats and their dogs, their birds and their rabbits, and how often they had been too busy or too rational or too embarrassed to take seriously what those animals seemed to be trying to say. We live beside creatures who experience the world through entirely different instruments than ours. They hear frequencies we cannot. They smell what we are unable to detect. They feel vibrations through their paws that we filter out as background noise. And yet we have spent centuries constructing a worldview in which the human perceptual system is the gold standard, in which what we cannot detect does not exist, and what animals notice without our confirmation is merely instinct, which we have decided is a lesser thing than reason. Oliver would disagree, probably, if he could be bothered to care about our opinions, which he almost certainly cannot. The language of presence. There is a particular kind of love that does not announce itself. It does not send flowers or say the right thing at the right moment. It does not perform. It simply shows up night after night and stays. It asks for nothing. It makes no demands. It sits at the edge of the crib in the dark and watches, because watching is what it can do, and what it can do is everything it has. Oliver could not call the doctor. He could not read a medical chart or identify RSV in a lab. He could not explain to Sarah, in any language she would understand, what he was sensing or why it alarmed him. All he could do was be present, visibly, persistently, undeniably present, in a way that eventually forced the question, why is a cat doing this? That question saved Mia's life. We talk a great deal in the modern world about communication. We have more channels than any generation in history, more ways to send messages, broadcast feelings, share information. And yet we have become, in many ways, worse at the kind of attention that Oliver demonstrated. The slow, patient, nonverbal attentiveness that notices something is wrong before there's language for it. The attention that does not check its phone or scroll to the next thing. The attention that simply stays. Animals have not forgotten how to do this. We have. There are behaviors who argue that what Oliver did was not love in any meaningful sense. That was a response to olfactory data, mediated by neural circuits shaped by millions of years of evolution, with no emotional content beyond the biological imperative to respond to threat cues. This may be true. It also does not change what he did. It does not change the fact that Sarah's daughter is healthy. And it does not change the way Oliver looked at Mia, then and now, and on every ordinary morning when he jumps on the chair beside her and watches her play with the studied, proprietary attention of someone who has decided, for reasons entirely his own, that this particular small human is his responsibility. Call it instinct if you need a word for it. I call it love. I know what I saw. Sarah, what the story actually teaches us. If there's a lesson in Oliver and Mia, and there are several layered and interlocking like the rooms of a house, the most practical one is simply this. Pay attention to your animals, not with superstition, not with the projection of human drama onto creatures who have their own experience, but with genuine, curious attention. If your cat is behaving unusually, ask why. If your dog is fixating on something without explanation, take it seriously. If an animal who knows you, who shares your space and breathes your air and has learned the rhythms of your household, suddenly breaks pattern, that is information. It may be nothing, but it may not be. The deeper lesson is about the nature of intelligence itself. We have built a civilization around a particular model of knowing, linear, verbal, analytical, documented. It is a magnificent model. It built medicine and mathematics and the internet, but it is not the only model. There's another kind of knowing, ancient, embodied, chemical, and prelinguistic, that lives in the nervous systems of the animals beside us, and that we access, if we access it at all, only in our most exhausted and unguarded moments. Oliver knew something before Sarah knew it, before the monitor knew it, before the doctor knew it. He knew it with his nose and his body, and whatever version of care lives in the brain of an 8-year-old orange tabby, who was once too difficult for everyone except one man who looked through a chain-link door and saw something worth taking home. None of us, in the end, are what our files say we are. Mia, Oliver, and now, Mia is 3 years old now. She has learned to say Ollie before she has learned to say many other things, which tells you something. Oliver tolerates her with the dignified resignation of a diplomat assigned to a difficult post. He lets her pat him with the flat-palmed enthusiasm of a toddler and only occasionally relocates to a higher surface. He sleeps near her, not as intently as that November, but near, close enough. Sarah says she no longer dismisses what Oliver does. When he is restless, she pays attention. When he lingers in a room, she asks herself what he might be noticing that she is not. She has become, in the years since Mia's illness, a more careful reader of the small behaviors she used to ignore, not just in Oliver, but in everything around her. The world, she says, is louder than we think. We just have to stop talking long enough to hear it. Daniel hung a small frame print in the hallway outside the nursery. It is a photograph of Oliver at the crib, taken from the doorway at 3 a.m., small, grainy, lit only by the nightlight inside. The cat is a silhouette with 2 bright eyes, and he is watching over something you cannot see in the frame, which is Mia. It is not a beautiful photograph in any technical sense, but it is the most beautiful thing in their house. Underneath it, in small handwritten letters on the mat, he knew first. Did this story touch you? Every day, animals show us forms of love and intelligence we aren't paying attention to. Share this story for every pet owner who needs to hear it, and for every Oliver who deserves to be recognized. Share Oliver's story. Paw prints. Some heroes have 4 paws. If you have a story about an animal who surprised you, who sent something, protected someone, or simply showed up when it mattered most, the world deserves to hear it. Tell your story, because every Oliver out there is guarding someone quietly in the dark.